Hi, sociology students. Welcome back. Today we're talking about the elements of structure. Now, I want you to be careful because remember, we already talked about the elements of culture. And remember Gramsci's triangle, culture is one corner of it and structure is another. So we're talking about a completely different part of what makes up society. So today we're talking about social structure. Social structure is the more permanent stuff. It's the more patterned. It's harder to change. Culture changes out pretty quickly, like TikTok's here one day, gone the next. We'll see. But structure stays longer. So structure's the stuff like our family patterns, our government, things that are more sturdy, I guess, than culture. Okay, so we'll break it down a little bit, just like we did with culture, to see what those little bitty parts are, and hopefully that'll help give us a larger understanding of social structure. Okay, so what's the first element? That's status. So status is like the position in society. That's really it. How high are you relative to other people in society, or how low are you compared to how other people are in society? And you can get that way through a lot of different things. So, like you guys are in school right now because you want that status of educated because that'll get you higher in society compared to other people who are applying for jobs. You'll have a definite benefit. Even just the way that we dress, the way that we talk, the cars that we drive, all of these little things can add up and give you a higher status. I was lecturing on this a couple years ago, and a student whipped out his flip phone, and he said that people often gave him a hard time and lowered his status just because he had an old phone, right? All of these little things add up to give us a higher or lower status. In class, what we'll do is we'll take somebody and we'll kind of play with their status and see what's taking them up and what's taking them lower. Okay, but one thing I want to say before we move on is that we're all constantly striving to have a higher status or maybe to avoid going down. So a lot of our social lives is spent trying to negotiate status, trying to get that higher status or trying to avoid, heaven forbid, going down in status. So a lot of what we do in the social world is sort of centered on trying to achieve a certain status. Okay, so what do we do with these statuses once we get them? That's our next one. Roles. Roles are just sets of expectations given a status. Okay, so I'll use teacher since that's one that I know pretty well. If one is a teacher, there are certain expectations for that role if you want to get the status. So I want the status of teacher, right? Like that's important to me. I love doing all of this, right? So I have to be careful. I have to meet those expectations, or else people say no. Like, have you ever had a teacher where you're like, man, like they have the job, but they're terrible at it. They shouldn't keep doing that. They're going to lose their status someday, right? So that's somebody that they're not meeting those expectations. So what are some of the expectations of being a teacher? For example, being knowledgeable, right? What if I stood up here and I was like, I can't remember. You got to look that up for yourself. Like that would be silly, right? I would be a terrible teacher. I have to be knowledgeable. I have to be kind of friendly or personable to be a teacher, right? Have you ever had a teacher that was just terrible, socially, just not friendly, unkind, not a good communicator? They're not going to meet that set of expectations to get that status of teacher. What else? They have to probably have a job, right? Like, have you ever met somebody that they're like, oh, I can teach you anything, but what do you do? Oh, I don't know. I have some other completely different job, right? And you're like, oh, you're not a teacher. Like you might think you are, but you're not meeting those sets of expectations to get that role. Okay, in the glass castle, part of why we're so upset with Rosemary, and I'm upset with Rosemary, trust me, is because she's not really meeting the expectations of mother, right? Like she's not providing for her kids. She's not protecting them. I think we can debate whether she really cares for them. So she's not meeting those expectations. So we don't want to give her the status, right? Like the status of mother is earned. The status of teacher, that's something you work for. Again, we're striving for these things. And so if people come along, they don't do the expectations and they still want the status, we get pretty upset with people who try to play that game. Okay, the next one is groups. We have a whole discussion on groups. So tune in for that. That'll be our next YouTube. But basically, all of this is happening in a social setting, and we group in a variety of different ways. We know that some groups are temporary, some groups are long lasting, some groups are really instrumental to your success. Other groups, I could take it or leave it, right? So all of this grouping lets us sort of play out this role status combination. Okay, so we'll talk a lot more about groups, but just leave it at that for now. That we're doing that. You're not doing all of this all alone, right? You're doing this in concert with other people. All right, the next one is networks. This is the way that social structure kind of maintains itself without everybody having to know everybody. Can you think about like what a crazy world it would be if like when I went to go buy milk in the morning, I had to like call up the farmer who had the cow. Like, hey, was it a good cow? Is this for sure milk? Like, did you do anything you shouldn't have done? And then maybe when I went to pay, they'd have to call up the bank and say, hey, Holly's using her credit card. Or is she for sure good for the credit? Like, is she a good person? Are we going to get the money for this milk? Like, imagine if we had to like talk to every single person that we needed to interact in a daily basis. That would be chaos, right? We're able to use social networks where we just say like, hey, if I get my milk at Trader Joe's and I know that Trader Joe's is a pretty reputable grocery store, then I can feel pretty confident that I don't need to call the farmer. I can just trust through the social network that it's going to be milk. It's going to be okay. It's not just watery, something else, right? It's milk. It's fine. It's okay. And then when I pay, same thing, right? They know that if I have a card that says Visa on it or whatever, Discover, they know that, she's probably good for this. And even if she's not, there's some social network that's going to catch up with her eventually and make sure that she pays up. Okay. We use technology to create these social networks. So social network could be as simple as a flyer in your town, right? That says, "Hurry, this is happening." It could also be all of the technology that goes into social media and social networking in this era of, technology that we're living in right now. But it can flow through time and change. But the idea is that technology is really making this networking happen. And that can be low tech or high tech. The last one, social institutions. These are all of these patterns of behavior that meet basic social needs. So some examples of social institutions: families, right? Like, think of all the patterns. My brother's getting married, so I'm thinking about all these patterns that go into, getting married, and how maybe some of it's really silly, but you still got to do it, right? Like, it's so patterned, it's so entrenched. Like, two people, and then they register that with the government, and also there's probably a priest or somebody, and there's all of this that goes into it, and your family has to be there, and your dad walks you down the aisle, and all of this that's just very patterned, but it does meet a basic social need, right? And that's care, reproduction, all of these things that we need in a society, right? We need family. And so we've really patterned those behaviors to make it very predictable and very stable. Most social institutions, this is part of that stability piece, where very stable, hard to change. I think about, the fight for same-sex marriage and how hard that was, which is ridiculous, right? Like, basic human equality, right? But it was very hard, and that's because they were trying to change a social institution, and social institutions are change adverse. Okay, another example of a social institution would be like the economy. What if tomorrow Holly came up with this great idea, okay? Instead of using dollars and, cash, we're going to use peanuts. right? And so I go around, I try to convince everybody, like, let's go to a peanut-based economy. People would not go along with me, right? People would push back. They're like, no, 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 Holly. Like, we're not going to start playing with the economy just because you want to. Actually, Bitcoin is an example where probably there's a lot of security and there's a lot of good things happening with Bitcoin and the way that they keep track of Bitcoin. But because we're so entrenched in the dollar and the banking system that we have, there's a lot of pushback. And it's not just, even though it really probably is a smart thing and maybe we should look into it, we don't, because it's a social institution, it's entrenched, it's patterned, and it's kind of the base of our society. So that's the last thing I'm going to talk about here is if this helps you, it might be useful to think of these like a house. So social institution is kind of like a house. I made a little worksheet for you if you really like this, so you can kind of play with the idea a little more. So the social institutions, that's kind of like the foundation of your house. Like your house is sitting on that. It's like what is necessary for you to have a house. I don't know if any of you have ever had a problem with your foundation in your house, but it's a big deal. Like it costs lots of money. Sometimes it's just better to sell your house and not have that house anymore. Like it's really, really important. Like I knew somebody that like part of their house just started to fall off because there was a problem with the foundation. So if there's a problem with one of these social institutions, it can affect many other parts of the house. Okay, the social networks, that's like all the plumbing and electricity that's going throughout your house, right? Like if you only had electricity in your kitchen, that would be hard, right? Like that would not be a smooth functioning house. You need it moving through all the different parts, and you need different parts of your house to be able to talk to other parts of the house. And if it wasn't all interconnected, it really just, it wouldn't be very functional. It would be clunky and hard, right? Okay, next one is groups. This is like all the people moving throughout the house. Like, what's the sense of having a house if there aren't people sort of moving through it? And then you can go into one space and use that for what it's needed, and then you can move into another space and use that for what it's needed. And we're very dynamic and able to do that, right? Like, we know what a kitchen's for, and we're able to go into a kitchen and behave in kitchen ways, and then we can go into the bedroom and behave that way, like go to sleep, do whatever. Oh, that was awkward. Sorry. Okay, next one, roles. Okay, this is like what each space is set up for, right? Like a kitchen is used for cooking things, a living room is used for watching television and hanging out, a dining room is where you sit down and actually eat the food that was prepared, a bathroom is used for what bathrooms are used for. Like each space has its own use, right? But the space has to be meeting those expectations, right? Like if your kitchen, all of a sudden, like the refrigerator isn't working, the stove isn't working, the sink is clogged, like all of a sudden, like that's not really a very good couch anymore, or kitchen. And so you start to think about it very different. This is not my best lecture, guys. Thanks for hanging with me. I'm not going to do it again because I'm already at 13 minutes. Status. Okay, last one. This is, do you have a good house? Do you not have a bad house? And I know we've all done this before where you're driving around and you see a house and you're like, oh my God, that house is so cute. I like that house. It's adorable. I want that house, right? And that's that part of society where we do value certain things higher than other things, right? I've also driven by a house and I'm like, whoa, it looks like people live there. I'm really sorry that somebody has to live in a house that is that dilapidated and that non-functional, right? Not knowing at all what's inside. I'm only looking at the outside and making judgments about that house. Okay, we're going to talk about all of this. You guys are going to create your own social structure in class. It's going to be super fun. We'll get to be creative and imaginative. I can't wait to see what you have. Bye, students. Talk to you soon.